Today's episode is brought to you by our company, NanoChomp Marketing Strategy and Analytics. We help product and marketing teams solve problems and experience growth using data and approachable AI. Visit nanochomp.com to learn more. In this episode, we talk with Herb Cogliano. He talks through some of the systems he puts in place to help businesses at all stages of their scaling. He talks about some of the best books that he's read, including one called Scaling Up that we'll link for you. And we talk through a lot of different processes on how to build culture, how to build messaging, how to build leadership teams, and how to build businesses.
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting episode. Herb was pretty much born into an entrepreneurial family, grew up with it. And so it only makes sense that this is where he landed. But it was really great to see how he took a lot of those learnings from what he watched growing up and applied it to his own business, and then how he's helping others on their scale up and startup journey.
Yeah, seems like from day one, driven by principles and his mission. So this is going to be a good episode, good listen, tons of advice in here. And here's Herb.
Hey everyone, on today's episode of Soundbites, we have Herb Cogliano. He's the CEO of Aspire Growth Advisors, and he helps the leaders of growth companies achieve more freedom by developing industry-leading strategies. Essentially, he helps businesses and their leaders get from where they are now to where they want to be while driving a culture of accountability. Herb, welcome to the program. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren and Derek. Pleasure to be here and excited to be speaking with the Soundbite audience that you have.
Well, thanks.
Oh, we're so
really
excited to have you.
Hear. So let's start with the backstory. So how did you start? Where did you get the first domino that got you on this path you're on now?
Yeah, so there's a couple of big milestones. Number one, I was fortunate to be born into a family business. Literally the year after I was born, my father started a company. And for my entire life, spent around dinner tables, winter break, summer break, working, being involved in a family business. And our business was employment, helping other people get jobs. So there was a lot of meaning for me behind that. My father had gotten laid off earlier in his career. My mom having, babies at home, and, they felt the impact of what it was like to not have a job. And my father had a hearing disability. And so it was even harder back in the 1960s.
Yeah.
He learned about helping people through employment, got involved in the industry, but really was a missionary about helping people find employment, and started his own company in 1966. So that was the first point. The second point was upon graduation of college. What did I want to do? I was interviewing at all these other big companies, IBM, Prime Computer, Digital at the time. But I always wanted to be part of something that was special for me, where I could be loyal and also contribute. And so I went to work for the family business. I never looked back, had an amazing time with that. And then the third part was when I was 28, I always wondered, could I do it myself? Being second generation, I never wanted to look back. So I started another company, and that company was adult education. So education was complementary to employment, the better skills, the better jobs. And we took that from literally zero to an Inc. 5000 fastest growing company, and built an amazing best places to work culture. And I was hooked. I knew I wanted to be this entrepreneur creating opportunity and bigger futures. Then we exited in 2018 after a 30 plus year run. And I knew immediately I wanted to start this coaching practice to help other leadership teams navigate stages of growth they've never seen, the complexity of it, and help them do it with less drama and more impact. And I've been doing that now for over 5 years. I became the head professor of the master's business course in Scaling Up. I work with people globally I love all of them, but we share very similar themes in growing a company, whether you're in Romania, Australia, Canada, Africa, or right outside my door in Boston. And so this is kind of my life's work, and I love helping other teams get to where they want to get to.
It's really rare that we see such a cohesive path from like beginning to being able to assemble all the skills you've had to get to where you are. A lot of times it's kind of butterfly floating around and people accidentally find their path, but it seems like you guys have been mission driven from the day you were born, effectively, right? The year you were born, your father forms a business, mission driven. You see that, you scale up, you get to your next business, you do it from effectively scratch, you scale up. So you've seen, when you're coaching from a place of experience. You've been there before, you've looked behind that door. You're not just theoretically preaching towards people, right?
Yeah. You know what? If you think about it, I've seen the history of a 54-year operating company, and then I've seen startup. I've seen turnaround. I've seen new location expansion. I've seen location closing. You name it. We've done acquisition, we've done tuck in, but I was really fortunate to have this portfolio of experiences and the scaling up education and mindset that really comes together at the culmination of my career to really help other people do it so much smoother than what I had to live through to get all the experience I have today.
Yeah, it's such an impressive story. I am curious because you grew up in an entrepreneurial family, you saw everything firsthand. I'm sure there was a lot that you learned from sort of seeing that and hearing things at the dinner table. Is there anything that maybe you learned from watching your family and then did differently?
Um, so I'll frame it two ways, Lauren. Number one, we were very much aligned on our values,
Mm.
like the things that my father and mother had a way of behaving in treating people with generosity, with kindness, with respect, with integrity. Those were non negotiables in my house growing up. And modeling that in the business environment was gold. That's really the way people wanted to be treated. The part that was different was understanding that we each have unique leadership styles, personalities. And although my father had a very effective and inspiring style, I was never going to be him and he was not going to be me. And so I learned at an early age to view people's style and take from it the points that were very uplifting and positive, but also leave behind the ones for them that weren't. So you became this portfolio, this culmination of best practices from a variety of great leaders to create your own style, which was unique and special.
Or I rather, quote Bruce Lee probably more than I should, but it's really that resonates with me because one of the Bruce Lee quotes is, you take what's useful, you abandon what's useless, and then you add what's uniquely your own, right? And that's how you can continue to get good results because you're not going to be somebody else. You're not going to be the new version of who your father was with the same characteristics. You have a different approach. You're going to take your different things, put your different style on it, get different results for the different audiences that you're continuing to talk with. And in that point, you're working with startups, scale ups, people getting ready to exit. There's different needs, and you've touched each one of those needs yourself along that path. What is the most difficult stage of a business for you when you're looking at your client base and for you personally?
That's interesting. I thought I thought you were going to ask about what's the most difficult stage that a client would go through. And I would say all of them if they've never been through that stage
Yeah,
before.
that makes
Um,
sense.
but to your question, a coach is only as good as the student and the student's motivation to want to get to where they want to get to. So there's a lot of people during my career belong to trade associations, fellow entrepreneurs, and then always talk about growing $100 million company. Like it seems like 10 million and 100 million are two, like bing, 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 bing. Everybody wants that. But if you don't have a strong enough why you want it, it's only a number. And so I find sometimes people tell themselves they want something, but they don't really have the true conviction to want to ultimately get there. And as a coach, that makes it very challenging because to get to where you want to go is not always an easy road. And we're going to go through some ups and downs. And it's the ability to, get inspired by that why, energized by that why that helps you get through it. And that's one of the most important parts of our initial conversation. So Derek, I'd say to you, where do you and Lauren want to be 5 years from today? You may tell me 10 million fit, whatever. And my next question is why?
Yeah.
And sometimes you would be surprised they don't have a good answer. And I'd say, well, are you making money today? Yes. Do you have a schedule and a lifestyle that's in balance? Yes. Do you have any problems with the bank or making payroll? No. So why do you really want to change it? Sounds like it's pretty good right now. And so going through that's a really important part of the setting the foundation to get to where you want to get to.
Do you think a lot of people say they want to get, or maybe that you've encountered, say they want to get to 10 or 100 because that's what they think they should be doing, or that's what they've been told is the next step if they don't have a strong why? Or what do you think's driving them in that case, at least to get them in front of you, but they don't, if they don't have a good answer, what do you think's driving that?
So I'll just tell you my own personal story. In the beginning, we were involved in all of our trade associations for the staffing industry. And I would go to these meetings and I'd sit next to the guy that was running Manpower. Manpower was a $1 billion staffing company. Mm-hmm. Kelly Girls, they were over $1 billion. TAD in Tech Aid, which was over $1 billion. And then the regional guy that was 250 million. And I'd sit there and say, wow, why not me? They're nice, they're smart, they work hard, but I'm all those three things too. So I was kind of like, I wanted to be like the Joneses. Why can't I just have what they have? But when I went back home and I really internalized that, I hadn't been in their shoes. I don't know what they sacrificed or gave up to get to the point where they were. And I think that's really looking hard in the mirror and saying it's okay to have a goal, but why am I doing it? So I can just come to this meeting next year and say, now I'm $1 billion and now I'm like you. But you and I know that's not authentic enough to keep you in the fight when things get really tough. It's got to be deeper.
And I think that's where your foundation of having principles, having values, having purpose, having that why drive everything else you do makes you different than someone that would come in and say, oh, you want to be $100 million business? All right, well, buckle up, we'll get there. Because we joke about this a lot, Lauren, like, well, we could be $1 billion business tomorrow. We would sell $100 bills for $50 and we'd lose $1 billion doing it. But if I advertised that and enough people realized it wasn't a scam, I could build $1 billion business doing that. But does that tick the goals? Does that drive the purpose? Does that help our value? Does that line up with the values? Probably not, right? So once you get through that stage with a customer, through a client, through with one of your engagements, how do you build on top of those purposes and values? How do you help extract those from somebody and then build them into a good foundation?
Yeah, so every company, startup or scale up, has values. The challenge is they're kind of, in most companies, they're unwritten. So people are acting a certain way today in your company. And if your values weren't written, they're the unspoken values for your firm. What I help people do is harvest that so that they're now clarified, they're now consistent. We hire for them, we'd fire to defend them, and we'd take a financial hit to back it up.
Mm.
When you see people walking the walk, talking the talk, now we're behaving in a way that is much more aligned and collaborative and cohesive. That's the values. The purpose part, whenever I hear a leader come to me and say, you know what, I provide life insurance. And I know what that does for a family that unfortunately has a catastrophic situation. And I do that for 1,000 people a year. And I have letters and stories that really document we make a difference, making people feel safe in their most challenging hour, that they'll have financial stability for their family to get through the hard time.
Mm-hmm.
What these leaders who are really purpose driven say to me, I've built a business that I can do that for 1,000 people every year, but I'd like to do it for 10,000 people a year. How can you help me make my impact that more expansive? How do I do it? I don't know how. I'm stuck. And then when we get them to 10,000, they come back to me and say, I want to make it 100,000 people a year. And that is when the magic, because it's not about the money, although you will make money. It's about that journey of scaling your impact, like throwing a pebble into a pond. The ripple effect of a purpose is the real beauty. Purpose on the client, the impact on the client, the employee base, more jobs, more promotions, more opportunities, the community, more tax base, more charitable giving. All of it is a big ripple, and people want to play in a bigger pond. And that's the beauty of taking not only your own unique ability, but your company's unique abilities in really making a difference in the world. And that's what I call the double bottom line: purpose with profits.
So, yeah, I like the purpose with profits. I like that a lot because Lauren and I talk about this a lot. Specifically, the bastardization of the word capitalism, or the bastardization of the words entrepreneurship, and almost vilification of it. People misallocate what capitalism actually is, which, when you're thinking about it as a true entrepreneur, it's like, how can I provide value for my community? How can I provide extra value that wasn't there before with the skill set and talent that I have? Whereas other people might view that word differently, as greed or just a cash grab, right? Which isn't how we like to view it.
Sure.
So beyond the startup stage, getting to purpose and getting to foundation, how have you seen leaders make that transition to get to that 10,000 once they have the purpose in hand?
Yeah. That, I think, once your culture is solid, you're always working on your culture, values, purpose. But let's say you now have a foundation, your turnover is no longer one of your biggest top 3 challenges. You're able to attract people. You have an employer brand where you can hire to support growth. The next thing I find is typically strategy. Are you positioned in the market with an offering that is valued and unique from your competition? Now, a lot of companies that have scaled to a degree are valued, because if they weren't valued by a customer segment, nobody would be buying the product. We wouldn't even have a conversation. But what I find is if you're not distinctive, you're commoditized because there's 10,000 other companies that provide similar value products. So what we need to do in that 10 to 10,000 scale journey, find the market segment where you can be unique and distinctive and clarify who is your ideal core customer, because you may have 100 customers right now, but I guarantee you they are all not your core ideal customers. They're all profitable. They all, how do I say this? They treat you well back. They pay on time. They openly refer people to you. And so we kind of run a list over the last year of all your customers. We stack rank them by revenue and margin dollar. And then we look at the attributes of the top quartile. Who were they? What segment were they in? What did they buy? Through what channel? What was their psychographic, their demographic? And we put that profile together. And then our sales and marketing is focused on attracting them with, have you heard the term brand promises?
Well, I guess we have a different word for it, but yeah, hit me with it.
Yeah, so Domino's, you get a pizza in 30 minutes or less is a brand promise. Starbucks, if you don't like your coffee, we'll make it right.
Yeah.
So normally the brand promise are the top 3 things that your core customer values. And if you did it right, are distinctive from your competition. So we work with a client to identify the sandbox, and over time, those top 3 brand promises. And then we use marketing messaging to magnetically pull the right profile prospect to the ideal distinctive brand promise. And that's how we get from 10 to 10,000 additional territories, markets, countries, and we scale.
No, that sounds great. And it sounds like you're mining customer data to really take a data-driven approach to refining like who their target audience is. When it comes to brand promise, how do you go about crafting that? Is that testing, iterating? What is that just the marketer in me is very curious what your process is.
I don't think there's one way, but the simplest way is you get on the phone, you get out to lunch, and you take only, if you had 100 clients, I only want you to take the top quartile. And I want you to ask them a simple question. Out of all the choices you had in purchasing my service, why did you pick us? And I'm going to tell you what they're going to tell you, something very broad and generic. Lauren, I love your quality. And then you got to probe. When you mean quality, what do you mean? And you're peeling the layers back on that onion. You do about 20 of those calls and you probe from that one question, you're going to see that there's going to be a theme. Responsiveness, 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 reliability, reliability. What do you mean by that? Same day, same hour, and then next thing you know, you have it. In our company, we thought the brand promise was the right person with the right skill at the right time. We came up with it. We thought it was brilliant because we came up with it. And I'm laughing at myself because I'm like, wow, this is great. This is the best thing I've ever heard. And then I got on the phone and I started asking hiring managers, why do you work with us? And one gentleman was very direct. He goes, look, I don't have a lot of time, but all I care about is productivity. We were doing a lot of contract work. I want to know when that person gets here, they're going to hit the ground running. They don't need hand holding and they're going to get my job done. So as far as I'm concerned, what you guys do is send me productive people, period. So I did that 25 more times, and guess what they kept telling me? It's not the right skill, the right time, it's productive people.
Mm.
We built a whole operating business model around how could we send more people that would hit the ground running day one being productive, from screening, from onboarding, um, training, performance management. We had this whole playbook for managing productivity for offsite contract workers. And everything else we didn't even think about. We just stayed on point. And that took me probably 18 months. I mean, it didn't happen overnight, it was a journey. But I was committed to that journey because once we got it, the company just, it like a flywheel, it just kept going.
We had somebody describe product market fit, service market fit, and messaging fit as if you get it wrong, it's like you're pushing a rock up a hill trying to explain your value prop to
Yes,
everybody.
yes.
But when you nail it, it's like you're chasing that rock down the hill, and it really kind of flips on you, which is interesting. And when we look at our own strategies, we think through, what's that messaging? How do you become outcome driven? What is the outcome the end user actually wants? Like, the right skill set, that's great, that's a feature. The outcome is this is a productive person. The feature of them having the right skill set at the right time, that's great, but you make sure that you select to deliver that. So being really outcome based is yeah, that's interesting. And I think a lot of people miss it. Like Lauren and we see, I would say 80% of the people we work with, initially their value propositions are pretty nebulous, really confusing. They can't explain it too well, or they can't explain the outcomes too well. And then fixing that stops you from pushing the rock up the hill, kills the Sisyphean task quite a bit.
Yeah.
No, I'm glad that that's what you're experiencing as well. So beyond
So,
that, go ahead.
Derek, just one more thing for Lauren's benefit, because I didn't forget your question. From a market research point of view, the one thing that AI has done is
Mm.
that if you have data from customer surveys, net promoter scores, testimonials, and you can scrape off the client name in advance, and you can load that into some of the AI search, it will go through reams of information and client sentiment, and it will tell you what those top three are.
Mm.
And
Amazing, right? Just the tools have just gotten so great, and this is like the beginning, right? They're only going to get better, which is so exciting. Now that we're talking about data a little bit, I'm curious, like when someone comes to you, what is their data like? This is probably the data nerd in Derek. I'll ask for him, but is it clean? Is it easy to go through? Do you have to do a lot of work? Like, what are you seeing in terms of data collection now? We're hearing all of these things about like data, but are people cleaning it and, leaving it in good shape for you to analyze?
so, Lauren, I think the one thing I try and do as a coach is that I'm not a consultant. A consultant would do that work for you.
Yeah.
And what I want to do is advise you as a coach, and you do the work as the player.
Mm.
Right.
So I never get to that level where I'm doing your quote work,
Mm-hmm.
but you are internally, and that makes it that much more engaged and sticky because you own it.
And you know how to do it and make adjustments and
Yeah.
all that.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
people will get stuck, and I'll share perspective on how I would look at it or maybe try it differently. But I need them to own the journey because it's the only way they're going to get better as a player.
So owning the journey, we talked about messaging, we talked about owning, now you're at that owning the journey aspect of it. So when you're doing that, what are the barriers you run into when scaling up? What are the other barriers you hit along that path and along that journey?
Well, so leadership succession, the owner is smart, hardworking, and committed to growth. But they've been so used to telling, and they have a great team, by the way. but the team is used to being told what to do and directed.
Mm.
And then the owner gets frustrated because they don't want to keep telling people what to do all day long. Why don't they know what to do on their own? So, what made them a very good smaller business entrepreneur, command and control, makes them an awful scaling up entrepreneur because they don't know how to delegate. The people are not confident in their decision making abilities because they really haven't been making any for the first 3 years that they've worked with this owner. So now we have to go through leadership succession planning, leadership development programs. Sometimes the people make it, sometimes we got to bring new people in that can make it. That is the next impediment that I deal with.
Yeah, interesting. We experienced that. So when we were in corporate, in one of a different role that we were talking through, we acquired a business, and it was a really great business. And then it was not that problem, but that situation where you had a really strong founder who had a lot of really strong ideas, and when you product management team would ask individuals in the organization, hey, how are we going to do this? I'm like, I have to talk to this person, right? And it was very clear that he wanted his hands in a lot of things, which became a problem because all the decisions routed through this person, and they had a great skill set. So they were always good at problem solving. But then once it was part of a larger organization, that had to shift quite a bit. And it was an interesting transition.
Yeah. So it as a coach, I'm not only coaching the CEO one way, but then I'm coaching the leadership another way. I'm coaching the CEO how to let go, how to trust, and how to identify what they want to do, what is their unique ability, so they can do more of that, which I think is working on the company versus in it. And then instructing the leadership team how to be more independent, how to take on more authority, how to be more confident in delegation and decision making and communication with the entire company. And that takes time. It takes proper planning. I remember sitting down with one CEO, absolutely an entrepreneur, did not want to run any of the day to day, honestly. But I said, to do this right, we need to look at some of the things that are important. Will this person have the ability to hire and fire? Or you have to be in on every decision? What amount of a check will they be able to sign? $10, $10,000? When do you want approval? What type of PO can they issue with a vendor? How big? How often? How many management meetings do you want to be in? Weekly, daily, monthly? What about a financial update? How frequently? But I had this whole checklist. And when we got through, we got clarity on a succession roadmap. Because then I sat down with the heir apparent and said, this is the framework that you two are going to work in for the foreseeable future. And then we're going to evaluate that list every 6 months. And over time, he didn't want to meet weekly. He said, no, I only want to meet once a month. And I don't want the 5 reports anymore. I only want these 2. And it just became better and better until really he was just a shareholder and no longer involved in any of the day to day. And he's doing exactly what he wanted to do. And the company's become an incredible vehicle for him and his family.
It's really interesting. I was sitting here thinking about how many CEOs and founders you've probably spoken to over the years, and assuming it's quite a bit. And this is just I'm so curious. Like, are there certain traits or habits that you see in the most successful CEOs?
Yeah, so I have 5 traits that I've kind of gathered over my journey. And number 1 is they're all growth oriented. They're not comfortable. Some people run a lifestyle company. There's millions of them. There's nothing wrong with it. They get to a certain level, certain income, certain schedule, life is good.
Yeah.
These CEOs in scaling up, growth is their mantra. And so they just, and by the way, not only revenue, but growing people, growing opportunities, growing cash, growing profit, valuation. Everything is looked at through a growth lens. Number two, they're coachable learners. They are very self aware and know what they don't know and are open minded enough and have a drive to want to learn even more. Number three, they are strategic thinkers by nature. They can see the big picture and they're more futurists that can see trends, connect dots, and not all of them can, but the majority of the best in class are. The fourth one, they are accountable executors. And this one's tough. They will hold people accountable. They have a KPI of 80 or 90% or better A players on their team, and they have the courage to top grade out those who are not.
Hmm.
And a lot of CEOs don't, and that gets them in trouble. And the fifth one is an effective communicator where the company, everyone is on the same page. They know the shared vision. There is total trust and transparency and a continuous dialogue between the head of the company and the employees. We do weekly CEO messages for all of our clients, whether it's on video or email. Every week we have messaging go out company wide that everybody knows where we are in relation to that vision journey. And those five things together are, I think, the secret sauce.
Do you see that consistent across generations? Maybe like, how does that stack up against maybe Gen Z or like millennial CEOs and founders?
I think it's consistent across great leadership.
Hmm.
I mean, we're talking about scaling up companies. I'm not talking about a
Yeah.
company 2 to 3. But if
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
going to have 30, 300, 3,000 people, I don't know one of these that you can't do
Yeah.
and be successful. Now, I think to your point, Lauren, I think some people may almost like everyone has a unique leadership style. I have one client, they only want to do the communication update by email. They're not
Mm-hmm.
comfortable on video.
Mm-hmm.
I have another client that does video like vanilla, just kind of hit my iPhone, play. And I have another one that's like integrating graphics, sound, push, you name it. I think that will be the unique difference generationally.
That was the one that's stuck out to me, was the communication style, because we hear a lot about Gen Z really not having to have like that one-to-one or that face-to-face communication. Even video can be fatiguing and challenging. Everything is on text or in really short soundbitey TikToks or something like that. So I was just curious if you had noticed any trends, but yeah, it sounds like you've seen some of those differences in how they communicate. Not that they don't communicate, just their styles.
I think what happens over the long term is that people have a choice. A players have a choice where they work. And I think employees have lost confidence because of a lot of war stories with CEOs slashing people
Yeah.
on fraud. And I think what we like to do with this weekly messaging is that people get to know for themselves about a leader being authentic. They get to learn their personality style. They get to learn if this person is full of you know what,
Mm-hmm.
or are they genuine. And I think that's the ultimate goal of this communication, building vulnerability and authenticity with your employees, because they're going to judge you and you want them to judge you correctly. And a 30-second soundbite on TikTok is not going to let me judge if you're authentic or not. So if people are doing it that way, they're going to have to adapt.
Yeah.
No, I think that's really good information. And the communication is so important. There was one person we worked with years ago, and we were talking about how we get the whole team aligned on a message to where you could get that message repeatable inside of the organization, because everyone had a slightly different message and tone. And the example he always came back to was NASA during the 60s, like the moon landing. It's like you ask the person who's taking out the garbage at NASA, what did you do today? And he's like, I'm working towards putting a person on the moon. It didn't matter which role you played in that organization. That was the mission. That's what everyone was doing. Not, I took trash to the dumpster. It's like, nope, I'm putting a man on the moon today, which is,
Yeah, love
we
it.
think about that a lot. So you have a background not only with scaling up, but you're a John Rockefeller type person at your core, right? So what are some of those secrets and habits of businesses from the Rockefeller school that apply to successful businesses? We talked about the habits of CEOs, now about businesses in general, and I think we touched on a few of them, but what else would you say are really important elements?
Yeah, so the executive team has to be healthy and aligned. There's 10 Rockefeller habits, practices that John D. Rockefeller did in building his empire. When you have a team dynamic issue, the ability to do the other 9 habits are very hard, because you're working against each other versus with each other. So building and hiring and developing a healthy team dynamic at the senior level and then throughout the company is the only habit that's got to be done in order, is habit number 1. Habit number 2 is everybody aligned around the one thing that will move the company forward this quarter. And you're going to notice in a company that's not doing this, finance has a new accounting software they're bringing online. That's pretty important. Sales is implementing their new playbook. That's pretty important. Operations is putting in a new fulfillment system. That's pretty important. But not synchronized, they can be at odds with each other.
Mm-hmm.
We want to
seen
take
that.
functional leaders and turn them into enterprise thinkers. If we had to look at the entire company together, what's the main thing that we got to get over this quarter to hit our goal? Is it turnover? Is it driving down the cost of client acquisition? Is it fulfillment, accuracy, or CSAT scores for customer satisfaction? Once you get the entire team around that main thing, we can find aligning things in our functional departments that can contribute to getting that solved. And it doesn't mean we don't implement the finance software or the sales playbook. It just means that we have to do it in a way that coordinates with the main thing. Otherwise, the company can be vitally hurt by ignoring it.
Sure. No, I think that all makes sense, and I think the big themes of the conversation we're having is like getting the messaging right, getting the alignment right, getting your culture right, can put yourself in a great place to be able to grow. But until if those are not in place, the business and the leadership team are just going to struggle, right? You're not going to get the results you want.
Yeah. I had one customer that was implementing like Salesforce. They were so excited, and it was expensive
Yes.
and taking a lot of time.
Yeah.
And I said, I understand what this will do, And I said, I am confused. You've had massive sales team turnover. What's the main thing?
Yeah.
I'm going to
Is
implement
it the tool?
Salesforce to a team that's not even going to be here. Don't you think I need to deal with my hiring practices, my core value, interviewing and screening, maybe address my compensation system if people are opting out before I deal with Salesforce?
Yeah.
And
We actually
Just a
see this
lot.
kind of stuff a lot. And so we look at it as typical consulting XY chart. It's like impact on one axis, effort on the other one. It's like, what is the highest impact thing you can do that's impacting your business negatively or positively? Now, of those things, which one is the easiest to do this week? Do that first. And you're, we were kind of laughing about Salesforce. We have a few clients that are on it, few that probably need to be on it, others that got sold a bill of goods of, like, the genie in the lamp, the phenomenal cosmic power with the itty bitty living space. It's like, if you don't have somebody that can really implement it, maintain it, run it, deploy it, and get the value out of it, it's a very expensive tool. And back to where we started the conversation, why? Like, what is the why? Why do you need this thing particularly?
Especially if you're having other issues that Salesforce won't solve, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to solve like the root issues. It sounds like your client was having, but so as we have a few last questions that we love to ask every guest, and I'm very curious about yours because you sort of have grown up in, entrepreneurial background, but knowing what you know now about everything that you've seen with your successes and where you are today, if you could go back in time and sit at the dinner table with an 18 or 25-year-old version of you, what advice would you give them?
probably tell them to buy Apple stock.
Yeah.
But
Same.
I know, but if I couldn't do that, um, reading Scaling Up by Vern Harnish was really the playbook for an entrepreneur to understand how to deal with the stages of growth we had never encountered.
Hmm.
And although I read quite a bit, this was a book that I didn't want to read. It was a book I wanted to master. And I think the difference in learning, there's a lot of things I'll learn about, but the few that you're willing to master are normally the things that you make your career and build your company on. And I would tell somebody, like, I think I've read this book now over 35 times cover to cover.
Mm,
And it's like watching a good movie the second, third time. There's always another bit
good
of
catch.
that is like, oh God, I that's a new thing. I didn't even see it.
Yeah.
And journey of mastery on a very important topic of dealing with the stages of company growth for an entrepreneur was vital information that I needed to own it myself. And that's what I would tell an 18-year-old entrepreneur looking to have him be the next, or her, the next scaling up champion for their era.
I love that distinction of mastery versus learning. I think that's a really important distinction that you don't hear like too often. So I think that's really smart. Well, last question that we like to ask is, besides scaling up, since I know you have it right there, what other books or podcasts or things are you listening to or consuming? It can be business or not.
So the way I do it is I like the learning to be directional.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'm in a book club with a bunch of my buddies, and we'll read like The Day the World Visited, and it was a story about 9/11 when the
Oh.
planes landed in Finland.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's a great story about human nature and the generosity of these people in Canada,
Mm.
helping thousands of people that were stranded during a very tough time in 9/11.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
I love stories that are inspirational, that show humanity does have a heart. But from a business point of view, I kind of look at the 4 decisions in scaling up: people, strategy, execution, and cash. And I'm normally doing directional dives based upon the company's challenge that I'm dealing with. So if I'm dealing with people, I'll do a deep dive on Patrick Lencioni, the 5 dysfunctions. Or, I may look at Jim Collins' good to great work, or Gallup 12, looking at the sentiment and hearts and minds of the people. And if I'm looking at cash, I may look at something called Simple Numbers or Profit First. Those are great reads in that area. So I think that's how I would describe it.
I think that's great. That's great advice. That's a really great list. And I love how you segment it off depending on what your goal is, what you're trying to do, what we need to look at. This is where I would start. So, really good approach. Really like the way you have a system towards everything. The coaching approach is fantastic. Really, really great advice. And Herb, we really appreciate you joining us today. Great, great episode.
Yeah, no, I loved being here. I thank you guys very much. And for those of you that want to learn more, is your business ready to scale? Please, I have a free scaling up business readiness assessment. Just go to my website. If you want me to say it, I will. If not, you'll have it on the show notes.
Say it and we'll link it too.
Yeah, feel free to go to aspiregrowthadvisors.com. And thank you again.
Thank you so much. Really
Thanks so
appreciate it.
much.